I'm going to call the Indiana Environmental Rules Board June 14th, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. to order. It appears we have a quorum, but I do need to call the roll since we're doing this partially remotely. Commissioner Rockensus.
Here.
Dr. Nemick.
Here.
Dr. Alexandrovich.
Here.
Mr. Schuler. Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Rulon.
Here.
Ms. Nelson.
Here.
Mr. Horn.
Present.
Mr. Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Etzler.
Here.
And Ms. Kozierski.
Here.
And Chairman Guard is here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we do have a quorum. I mean, at this point, I'm going to ask Dallas O'Hearn to cover the meeting logistics for in-person and remote participants.
Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dallas O'Hearn. I'm the digital media specialist. We will be taking questions and comments from the public today. For those members of the public in the meeting room today, please make sure that you complete a speaker card if you would like to speak. Speaker cards are located on the table at the entrance and should be given to Carla Kendrick when completed. For those joining us via Zoom, if you would like to speak, please use the raise hand or chat feature. To access the raise hand chat feature at the bottom of your screen, in the middle of that menu, there's a chat icon which you can click on to show the chat dialog. You should also see the raise hand option. Please utilize the raise hand option or chat features if you have any questions or comments. For those joining us by phone, you can raise your hand by pressing 9, and when you call upon, you can unmute by pressing 6. For everyone in today's meeting, please identify yourself when speaking. If any members of the media have joined us via Zoom, please utilize the chat feature or email media@idem.indiana.gov if you have any questions. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on IDEM's website. And with that, I'll turn the meeting back over to Beverly Guard.
Okay, thank you so much. Our first order of business today is approval of the summary of March 8th, 2022. That's not right, 2023. Board, are there any additions or corrections to the summary as presented? If so, I need a motion to approve.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second, this is Ted Hager.
This is a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The summary is approved as drafted. Commissioner, your report, please.
Thank you, Chairman Guard, members of the board. Thank you for being here today. Since March, there's been quite a bit of stuff going on. First, I want to report on staffing. All state government has been focused on staffing up since the governor's compensation study. It was completed in October. In January, we were at 769 employees, which was a little bit up from October, which was right around 750. Today, we're sitting at 801. So we have seen growth in our different programs, which is great. We have seen multiple applications per position that we post, and those the people applying are good quality candidates. So that's been a huge improvement as well. And so now we are being very diligent when we post positions to make sure with the new compensation and with our budget, that we are able to afford the different people per fund that they sit in. And then making sure we make strategic decisions on where we actually need assistance regardless of the program. Two people in particular, one is here with me today that I want to recognize, Colleen Reniker. For those in here, Colleen, can you stand up? Colleen's our new Deputy Assistant Commissioner in the Office of Land Quality. She'll be overseeing our tanks branch. Doug Laux, who he's still with us, but he'll be leaving state employment on Friday. She will be taking over his duties, and she has a long background in the tanks world. I'm really excited for her to join the senior team. And then additionally, because of all the new staff we're bringing in, many are very young, and which is great. It gives us the ability to train them up, but we need somebody to focus on training and development. And so we have invested in a staff training and development person. That individual, her name's Amanda Hall. She started on Monday as well. She has a pretty high hurdle that she's working towards. There's multiple buckets that we have her focusing on. One is obviously training and development. Another is a leadership program that we can operate within the agency. Other agencies have those, but IDEM employees only get so many seats. So I want to use that for longer term. And then three, establishing a very good and thorough mentorship program, not only within programs, but across the agency, so people know each other regardless if you're in air, land, and water. The next thing I want to cover is the rather large EPA climate pollution reduction grant, the greenhouse grant initiative. We were one of, I think, 48 states that put our name in the hat for that. So there's two parts to it. The first part is literally states could apply and they get up to $3 million to plan how to reduce greenhouse gas within the state. And so we did that. We are currently working through the final application process with EPA, as well as bringing on a vendor to help us do a greenhouse gas inventory and then do outreach and communication with everybody else that may be interested in that program. The great thing about this particular grant process is once we get to the second pot, which is 4.6 billion in competitive grants, it's all voluntary. So companies, industries, governments, you name it, they can apply for these dollars to do voluntary reductions in greenhouse gas emissions that maybe they wanted to do before, but they couldn't because of costs. So then we're able to subsidize that through these grant processes. Now that's the bigger amount of money, that's a ways out, because we have to do about a year or so worth of planning. But we're excited to get started there. We're constantly looking at how can we create efficiencies within the agency. One that I have been particularly focused on is our cleanup programs. The state cleanup program and the voluntary remediation program. On average, when you are a responsible party walking into one of those programs, you're looking at between 11 and 14 years in which you will be in that program. And for a variety of reasons. Some of it is IDEM processes, some of it is insurance issues. There's a whole gambit of problems. But I've tasked our remediation team with looking at what can we do to knock that down? How can we be more efficient? How can we move these things faster? Communities want these properties back on their tax rolls quickly. We have more sites than we have people to manage. And the people that are managing the sites are getting burned out because they have way more properties that they're managing that they can keep up with. So just by doing simple process improvements that we're going to be rolling out to the remediation community, we are able to potentially knock some of those down from 11, 14 to 4 to 7 years, which is a huge increase in time that we can use other places. So we're going to be communicating that out to the remediation world in July or August and see what their thoughts are on what we're wanting to change. And then we're gonna move that forward. And then finally, I was gonna talk a little bit about legislative session. There were quite a few bills that were worked on in the environmental field. One that I'm particularly proud of, thankful for Drake Abrahamson, who's our legislative director. He shepherded the bill through the session, was the ability to increase our air fees. We will be hearing the preliminary adoption of that rule today. That was backed by all of our industry folks, which was great. Everybody came to the table and said, item needs this. We need the air permit program to stay in Indiana and not be taken over by EPA. And so that was a major win. There were a number of other bills that we got involved in. One that had to do with excess liability trust fund. It allows for more compliance-based expenditures to come out of the fund. Right now, we wait to spend money until there's a problem. This allows us to spend money before there's a problem to hopefully not spend as much on problems, which includes like paying 50% for tank replacement or allowing some of the above ground storage tanks, specifically in airports and bulk facilities that have access to the up fund and other things like that, trying to be proactive because the fund balance is building and there's more we can do with it. There was a study bill where item has to do a study on wind blades, solar panels, and lithium batteries on how we dispose of those long term. So we're getting started on that. And then there's a number of other bills. And if you guys have any questions on a particular bill that I don't bring up, I'm happy to try and answer. But there's also the rulemaking bill, which I know this board took particular attention to, and many of the other agencies are paid large attention to. It's House Bill 1623. I made a number of changes. I don't think I could express exactly how that's going to look and how that's going to change what we're doing now. Nancy and our legal team and our rules team are working with the governor's office. They're putting on workshops to make sure that we all understand what the changes are and what they mean and how to do rulemaking going forward. This meeting and the meeting in, I think in August, we're going to be working on rules and we're grandfathered in to continue working down the old process. From a procedural standpoint, with regards to your activity with rulemakings, it doesn't change dramatically. We get rid of a first notice, but we still basically have to do the first notice through a second notice, I guess. We still have to answer comments. The difference is we have to have language out to the public before we can propose a rule. And then we don't have to do as many, I believe, as many, preliminary adoption versus final adoption versus whatever adoption. So, but we'll next meeting, Nancy and her team are going to have a full rundown of what this means for rulemaking, how this is going to look going forward. And we'll be able to answer a lot more questions on that then. And I think that's it for me. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Commissioner, I have a question. I know they lifted some more regulations from wetlands, and then the administration or the Supreme Court also weighed in on that. So what protection, if any, do we have for wetlands in Indiana right now?
So first, there was some language that was floating around this session on wetlands. That language did not make it through. But it was with the promise that I and my team would work with the builders and other concerned parties throughout the summer to come up with a compromise on how we deal with some of the ambiguities around the different classes of wetlands and what falls in, what falls out, and a more streamlined process. And we've already started those conversations. As far as federally, the second case in front of the US Supreme Court was decided that the EPA's regulation of wetlands stops at the wetland that abuts a water of the US, a river, lake, or stream. It has to be directly next to that water. And they use language like it has to have a continuous connection that you wouldn't be able to tell one from the other. So in the past, many of the wetlands, just in the past 3 years, many of the wetlands in Indiana were considered federal because you could find a significant nexus from a river, lake, or stream that they would consider federal and connect that to the wetland through ditches or other streams or what have you. That's no longer the case now. So those wetlands that would have been protected federally a couple months ago would now fall under the state wetland program. So there are still protections for those wetlands. Now we're just gonna see what happens this next legislative session on the changes to our program will be.
Okay, thank you. Do any other commission members have any questions?
Yes, this is Joanne. I have one question. That greenhouse gas inventory, how broad is it gonna be? Is it gonna be state government, industry, everything? Everything.
So part of what we're going to be doing is, and we've already started the conversations, is having, because there's multiple agencies that have to be involved. This is much bigger than just IDEM. NDOT is going to be involved. Department of Ag is going to be involved. Probably Department of Health and other agencies that have that kind of a footprint. And then it is literally a greenhouse gas inventory of everything in your state. So it's going to be pretty in depth.
Are you gonna get that done in 2 years?
Well, that's why we're hiring, that's why we're trying to hire a third party that specializes in doing these kinds of things. Because, yeah, no, if it was on us, no, we couldn't, there's no way. But we can use that money, it's 3 million, for the purposes of hiring somebody to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yes, Chairman, I wondered, you mentioned you would be rolling out some streamlining proposals for remediation to that community, and what form will that take? Is there a direct link to that community?
So the first thing we're gonna do is we like with any program, we have frequent customers. So we're reaching out to those guys first, the attorneys and the consultants.
Okay.
That directly work with that. And then there's a larger community of consultants called MCCA that we will be working through. And I've been talking about this for a year or more. But now we're at the point in which we have something, we have meat on the bones that we can then go and show to people. Yeah.
Very good. Any other questions? Okay, if not, thank you, Commissioner. We'll move on and ask Chris Peterson for rulemaking report.
Good afternoon, I'm Chris Peterson in the Rules Development Section of the Office of Legal Counsel. For today's board packet, an updated document was sent out electronically and is provided in hard copy for the board members participating in person. The document is the preliminarily adopted rule with IDEM's suggested changes for the definition of solid waste rulemaking. The difference between the original and the newer updated version is just formatting revisions for clarification, but we wanted to make sure that the board acted on the correct copy. So that's the one that will be the exhibit. Just wanted to let you know that was the difference there. Right now, we are tentatively expecting the next board meeting to be on August 9th, 2023. And at that meeting, we anticipate presenting the Title V permitting fee rule to you for final adoption if it is preliminarily adopted today. And at this time, that is the only rulemaking we have on the agenda, but there's always a possibility that another rulemaking will start moving forward, and if so, they will also come to board. And that's all I have, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any questions for Chris? Thank you. Today, we have hearings for the following regular rule board actions: adoption of Title 326 CFR updates, the preliminary adoption of Title V permitting fees, and wastewater treatment plant operator certification. We have final adoption of definition of solid waste and underground storage tank revisions. There will be a hearing on non-expiring rules in accordance with the requirements of IC 13-14-9.5-1.1. And finally, we will discuss the citizens petition to determine if a hearing should be scheduled. As a reminder, if you wish to testify in any of today's hearings, please fill out a comment card and give it to Carla Kendrick at the sign-in table. The rules being considered at today's meeting were included in board packets and are available for public inspection at the Office of Legal Counsel, 13th floor, Indiana Government Center North. The entire board packet is also available on IDEM's website at least 1 week prior to each board meeting. A written transcript of today's meeting will be made. The legal transcript and any written submissions will be open for public inspection at the Office of Legal Counsel. A copy of the transcript will be posted on the rules page of the agency website when it becomes available. Will the official reporter for the cause please stand and raise your right hand and state your name?
Libby Meyer.
Do you solemnly affirm that you will keep complete and true notes of all that transpired and prepare a transcript thereof, and faithfully perform all duties imposed upon you as an official reporter of the state of Indiana?
Yes.
Thank you. Moving on, this is a public hearing for the Environmental Rules Board of the State of Indiana concerning adoption of 326 IAC 1-1-3 and 326 IAC 20-1-1, Title 326 CFR updates. I will now introduce Exhibit A, the draft rule, as the record of the hearing. Keelan Walsh will present the rule.
Good afternoon, members of the board. I'm Keelan Walsh, and I'm here to present LSA number 23-29, references to the Code of Federal Regulations for your consideration. The reference to the Code of Federal Regulations at 326 IAC 1-1-3 indicates the yearly edition of the CFR that is applicable to federal regulations that have been incorporated by reference throughout 326 IAC, unless a different edition is specified in the rule. The latest version of the CFR contained in 326 IAC 1-1-3 is July 1st, 2018. Since that date, several new federal regulations have been promulgated that are not reflected in the current version of 326 IAC. Some of these regulations include the National Emission Standard for Hazardous Air Pollutants for the Portland cement manufacturing industry, emissions monitoring provisions in the state implementation plans required under the nitrogen oxide SIP call, standards for performance of new residential wood heaters, new residential hydronic heaters, and forced air furnaces, and reclassification of major sources as area sources under Section 112 of the Clean Air Act. This rulemaking will incorporate citations by reference from Titles 29 and 40 of the CFR into 326 IAC. By updating the reference date to July 1st, 2022, 326 IAC will be consistent with those regulations that the federal government promulgated between July 1st, 2018 and June 30th, 2022. This rule will also amend 326 IAC 20-1-1 to incorporate by reference 40 CFR 63 subpart C. This rule was most recently amended on January 5th, 2022, with the addition of 1 bromopropane to the Clean Air Act, Section 112B, the list of hazardous air pollutants. Previously, deletion of pollutants were the only changes made to the HAP list in subpart C, but the January final rule contains the first addition to the HAP list of 1 bromopropane. Therefore, it's necessary to incorporate that list into the state rules to ensure that permits are accurately issued and that state rules are consistent with federal standards. Item requests that the board finally adopt this rule as presented, and myself and program staff are available to answer any other questions that you have. Thanks.
Are there any questions for Keelan on the rule? Okay, thank you, Keelan. Are there any speaker cards?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone that's on remotely that cares to address the rule, proposed rule? Okay, the hearing is concluded. The board will now consider final adoption of 326 IAC 1-1-3 and 326 IAC 20-1-1, Title 326 CFR updates. Is there any board discussion? Is there a motion to be made to finally adopt the rule as presented?
Ken Rulon, so moved.
Seconded, Katie Nelson.
Okay, I'll call the roll. Dr. Nemec,
Yes.
Dr. Alexandrovich,
Yes.
Mr. Schuler,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Rulon,
Yes.
Ms. Nelson,
Yes.
Mr. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Esler,
Yes.
Ms. Kozierski,
Yes.
and the chair votes aye. That's 10 yeses and 0 nays. The rule has been finally adopted. This is a preliminary hearing before the Environmental Rules Board of the State of Indiana concerning preliminary adoption of 326 IAC 2-1.1-7, Title 5 permitting fees. I will now introduce Exhibit B, the draft rule, into the record of the hearing. Seth Engdahl will present the rule.
Members of the board, good afternoon. My name is Seth Engdahl, and I am a rule writer in the Rules Development section within IDEM's Office of Legal Counsel. The rulemaking currently under consideration is statutorily mandated and would increase the annual base fee for 2 permit types: Title V operating permits and federally enforceable state operating permits, or FESOPs. Specifically, the annual base fee for these permits would increase from the current fee of $2,381 to $6,100. This will result in an increase in revenue of roughly $4.3 million per year to support the Title V permitting program. For some background information on this rulemaking, the Clean Air Act requires state permitting programs to be supported by fees sufficient to cover all direct and indirect incurred costs in the development and administration of the program. Without proper funding, the management of the program would be ceded to US EPA. IDEM charges Title V sources 2 fees, an annual fee and a fee based on the tonnage emitted. Over the past decade, the agency has seen a steady decline in billable emissions. This is attributable to a myriad of factors, including coal-fired facilities transitioning to natural gas or facilities shuttering altogether. While the reduction in overall emissions is undoubtedly a good thing for the state, it has resulted in a growing deficit, currently $2 to $3 million annually for the Title V permitting program at IDEM. Accordingly, the agency worked with the Indiana General Assembly and interested stakeholders to pass legislation to raise the annual base fees and allow for a more predictable income stream for the program. This culminated in the passage of Senate Enrolled Act 155, which was signed by the governor on April 20th of this year. This rulemaking and the legislation mandating it are necessary to fully fund the Title V permitting program. I would note that this is the third time Item has raised its Title V fees in the past 30 years, with the most recent increase in 2019. A statutory cap of one increase of 10% or less per 5-year period remains in place. However, this cap was bypassed by Senate Enrolled Act 155 for this increase. Item requests that the board approve this rule as presented, and I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions? Thank you, Seth. Are there any speaker cards?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone remotely that cares to address the permitting fees? Okay, the hearing is concluded. The board will now consider preliminary adoption of 326 IAC 2-1.1-7 Title V permitting fees. Is there any more discussion? Well, is there a motion to preliminarily adopt the rules?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I'll call the roll. Dr. Nemec,
Yes.
Dr. Alexandrovich,
Yes.
Mr. Schuler,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Ms. Nelson,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Etzler,
Yes.
Ms. Kozierski,
Yes.
and the chair votes aye. That would be,
Chairman Guard, this is Ken Rulon. I vote yes as well, please.
oh, I'm sorry. Be 11 yeses and 0 nays. This is a public hearing before the Environmental Rules Board of the State of Indiana concerning preliminary adoption of 327 IEC 5-23 wastewater treatment operator certification. I will now introduce Exhibit C, the draft rule, into the record of the hearing. Crystal Hackney will present the rule.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Crystal Hackney. I'm a rule writer in the Rules Development section within the Items Office of Legal Counsel. I'm here to present rule number 18-365 for wastewater treatment plants and operators. This rulemaking repeals the existing rule at 327 IAC 522 and replaces it with 327 IAC 523. This rule addresses state statutory requirements that were made in 2015 and 2018 that affect IC 13-1811. These statutory changes allow electronic examination through a third-party administrator, add certification examination fees, require proof of compliance with continuing education requirements submitted with certificate renewal applications, update the renewal cycle for operator certificates from 2 years to 3 years, and adds reciprocity for certified operators from other U.S. territories applying for certification in Indiana. The new rule reorganizes and restructures sections as well as updating them with the following necessary changes. Clarifications for definitions, plant classifications, qualifications, and substitution qualifications, duties of an operator, passing score for certification examination, and the removal of specific allowable substitutions for education and experience to be replaced with more general criteria for allowable substitutions. The inclusion of third-party examinations and fees independent of item. The addition of exemptions on deadlines for renewal applications and examinations for individuals impacted by U.S. deployment. The addition of a provision requiring applicants who fail the examination 3 consecutive times to attend and pass an item-approved technical examination preparation course that is directly related to wastewater treatment before they can take the exam again. The clarification for new applications to include course completion documents. Operators who have had their certifications revoked or suspended are prohibited from performing lab analysis on samples used for compliance purposes, the addition of a limit for provisional certificates to a 90-day effective period with a maximum extension of no more than 1 year, and the reclassification of certain wastewater treatment plants due to the current struggle with meeting the requirements in the existing classification system. Item will present a non-rule policy document concerning the education and experience substitutions to the board when the final adoption hearing is held. Item requests that the board preliminarily adopt this rule as presented. Program experts and I are both available to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Crystal?
Yes, I have a couple. Can you clarify, if an individual is preparing for, say, a Class D, what's currently a Class D, will they be required to become an apprentice? Is that going to be a new requirement for ultimate certification?
Anyone that referred to Jason or Mark, and
Yeah, so Jason House is branch chief, compliance and enforcement and Office of Water Quality. So you can go down the pathway of becoming an apprentice on your way to becoming a certified operator, or if you have the education experience necessary to become an operator, you can take the examination for that.
Already.
Yeah, that doesn't answer my question.
Any other questions? Any speaker cards?
no, ma'am.
Okay, anyone remotely that wants to address the rule? The hearing is concluded. The board will now consider preliminary adoption of 327 IAC 5-23 wastewater treatment plant operator certification. Is there any board discussion? Is there a motion to preliminarily adopt the rules?
Chris Horn, I would so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'll call the roll. Dr. Nemec,
Yes.
Dr. Alexandrovich,
Yes.
Mr. Schuler,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Rulon,
Yes.
Ms. Nelson,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Yes,
Mr. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Etzler,
Yes.
Ms. Kozierski,
Yes.
and the chair votes aye. That's 11 yeas, 0 nays. The rules have been preliminarily adopted. And before I move on to the next one, I do have one correction that on the first vote to adopt the final rules, it was not 10-0, it was 11-0. Now, this is a public hearing before the Environmental Rules Board of the State of Indiana concerning final adoption of 329 IAC 3.1-5-4, 329 IAC 3.1-5-7, and 329 IAC 3.1-6, definition of solid waste. I will now introduce Exhibit D, the rule as preliminarily adopted with items suggested changes into the record of the hearing. Dan Watts will present the rule.
Good afternoon, members of the board and Chairwoman Guard. I'm Dan Watts of the Rules Development Section. I'm presenting LSC document 20-23 for final adoption. Item is presenting this rule for final adoption the second time because the proposed rule adopted on March 8th did not include the amendments to 329 IAC 3.161 in the recently effective LSA number 22-216 final rule. If this rule is promulgated as currently adopted, it would unintentionally repeal recently effective rule requirements. In this proposed rule presented for final adoption, 329 IAC 3.1-6-1B8 includes the additional Federal Register notice adopted in LSA 22-216. which became effective on March 24th of this year. These changes are shown with underlines in the updated proposed rules sent to the board, and no other changes to the rule language are being presented for final adoption. This rule itself amends the hazardous waste rules in 329 IAC 6.1 with the incorporation by reference of recent updates to the federal identification of solid waste for the purposes of hazardous waste management. The rulemaking is in response to a federal court vacatur of certain requirements in a 2015 federal rule for the definition of solid waste, which IDEM has previously adopted. With this rulemaking, IDEM's hazardous waste rules will be consistent with the federal definition of solid waste and also comply with the state statutory change, public law 120-2022 pertaining to these federal requirements. Representatives from IDEM are available to answer questions you may have for this rulemaking. And the department regrets to say and request that the board adopt this rule so Indiana's hazardous waste rules can be consistent with the federal requirements. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Dan? Thank you, Dan. Are there any speaker cards?
No, ma'am.
Is there anyone remotely that wants to address the proposed rule? Okay, the hearing is concluded. The board will now consider final adoption of 329 IAC 3.1-5-4, 329 IAC 3.1-5-7, and 329 IAC 3.1-6, definition of solid waste. Any board discussion? Okay, is there a motion to adopt items suggested changes?
Ken Rulon, so moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'll call the roll. Dr. Nemec,
Yes.
Dr. Alexandrovich,
Yes.
Mr. Schuler,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Rulon,
Yes.
Ms. Nelson,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Etzler,
Yes.
Ms. Kozierski.
Yes.
The chair votes aye. That's 11 ayes, 0 nays. The changes have been adopted. Is there a motion to finally adopt the rules as amended?
I would so move. Chris Horn.
Is there a second?
Second, Katie Nelson.
We'll call the roll. Dr. Nemec,
Yes.
Dr. Alexandrovich,
Yes.
Mr. Schuler,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Rulon,
Yes.
Ms. Nelson,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Etzler,
Yes.
Ms. Kozierski.
Yes.
The chair votes aye. That's 11 yeas, 0 nays. So the rules have been, guess that we amended the rules. No, that was a final adoption. So 11 yeas, 0 nays. This is a public hearing before the Environmental Rules Board of the State of Indiana concerning final adoption of 329 IAC 9 underground storage tank revisions. I will now introduce Exhibit F, the preliminarily adopted with items as preliminarily adopted with items suggested changes into the record of the hearing. Seth Engdahl will present the rule.
Members of the board, good afternoon again. My name is Seth Engdahl, and I am a rule writer within the rules development section within items Office of Legal Counsel. The rulemaking currently under consideration would make several changes to rules at 329 IAC 9. The overarching goal of this rulemaking is to better align rules governing underground storage tanks, or USTs, in Indiana with the Code of Federal Regulations. A Accordingly, the bulk of this rulemaking repeals sections of 329 IAC 9 that are either more prescriptive or identical to their federal counterparts, and then incorporates the relevant sections of the code for federal regulations. I would emphasize that this is not a complete repeal and incorporation by reference for rules governing USTs. Rules such as those governing UST closure at 329 IAC 9-6 are staying in place because their federal counterparts are generally vague and allow states to develop state-specific rules and programs. This rulemaking primarily impacts state-specific rules governing initial response, site investigation, corrective action, reporting, record keeping, and financial responsibility. Repealing these sections and incorporating their federal counterparts will provide the agency and UST owners and operators needed flexibility in responding to leaks, spills, and overfills of USTs. This rulemaking also incorporates the contents of certain notification forms in 329 IAC 9-2-2. The incorporation of these forms was deemed essential by the Office of Management and Budget to provide predictability to UST owners and operators. There has been one minor change to the rule language since preliminary adoption. In 329 IAC 9-2-2, there are multiple references to forms approved by the Indiana Department of Administration. The reference to this government body was an error, as it is the Indiana Archives and Records Administration that approves forms for use by the department. Accordingly, this erroneous reference has been corrected for final adoption. This rulemaking was preliminarily adopted by the board in November of last year. I then chose to withdraw the rulemaking from consideration at the March board meeting to ensure that legislation pending consideration by the Indiana General Assembly would not impact the rule. Because there was no such impact, the rule now is being considered today without any substantive changes. I request the board approve this rule as presented, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions for Seth? Thank you.
Chairman, I do have a question.
Yes.
In the adoption of these forms, will there need to be a migration? Is this a new set of forms that is different than what is currently being used?
No, it's
Like
the
the
current
registration?
forms. Yes, the current forms, all the contents of the forms just put into rule language. OMB would like us to start doing that from now on so that those reading the rule can predict what they'll need to have.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any speaker cards?
No, ma'am.
Anybody remotely? Okay, yeah. The hearing is concluded. The board will now consider final adoption of 329 IAC 9 underground storage tank revision. Is there any board discussion? We need a motion to adopt items suggested changes.
So moved, Chris Smith.
Is there a second?
Second.
Call the roll. Dr. Nemec,
Yes.
Dr. Alexandrovich,
Yes.
Mr. Schuler,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Rulon,
Yes.
Ms. Nelson,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
yes,
Mr. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Etzler,
Yes.
Ms. Kozierski.
Yes.
The chair votes aye. That's 11 yeas, 0 nays. The suggested changes by item have been adopted. Is there a motion to finally adopt the rules as amended?
So moved.
Is there a
Second, Katie.
Did I hear a second?
Yes, Katie Nelson.
Okay, call the roll. Dr. Nemec,
Yes.
Dr. Alexandrovich,
Yes.
Mr. Schuler,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Rulon,
Yes.
Ms. Nelson,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
yes,
Mr. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Etzler,
Yes.
Ms. Kozierski.
Yes.
The chair votes aye. It's 11 yeas, 0 nays. The rule has been finally adopted as amended. This is a public hearing before the Environmental Rules Board of the State of Indiana concerning the review of rules that do not expire under IC 13-14-9.5-1.1. Every year, IDEM is required to publish a list of rules that have been effective for 7 years, but not subject to expiration because they are necessary for a federally delegated program or to receive or maintain federal funding. This year, notices were published for the air rules in Title 326 and the waste rules in Title 327. A 30-day comment period was provided for each notice. No comments were received. I will now introduce Exhibit F, the list of rules in Title 326 that do not expire, and Exhibit G, the list of rules in Title 327 that do not expire under IC 13-14-9.5-1.1 into the record of the hearing. At this time, is there anyone who would like to comment on any of the rules listed in either notice? Are there any speaker cards?
No, ma'am.
Okay, anyone remotely? Okay, if not, this hearing is concluded. The board must determine, based on comments received, whether to direct the agency to open a new rulemaking for any of the rules that are listed in the notices. If the board chooses not to ask for a rulemaking, the notice must be made of no further action to be taken on these rules. Is there any discussion? So the motion that I would need would be either no further action on listed rules or to direct the agency to begin rulemaking on the specific listed rule. So do I have one of those motions?
Yeah, Ken Rulon, I move we would do no further action.
Second.
Is there, okay. Roll call vote. Dr. Nemec,
Yes.
Dr. Alexandrovich,
Yes.
Mr. Schuler,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Rulon,
Yes.
Ms. Nelson,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Etz,
Yes.
Ms. Kozierski,
Yes.
and the chair votes aye. That's 11 ayes, 0 nays. So we will have no further rulemaking on the rules that were designated. Citizen petition presentation. This is a petition to revise the fugitive dust rules, if you all remember. Today, the board will consider the merit of the citizens petition on fugitive dust to decide if a hearing should be scheduled to further consider an update of the existing fugitive dust regulations, specifically regulated to fugitive dust created by the companies located along East 96th Street, Hazeldale and Gray Roads in Indianapolis, Indiana. Nancy King will give an overview of the citizen petition process before the board discussion. And some of you all remember we've gone through similar things before.
Thank you, Chair Guard. As Chair Guard mentioned, we have done this, but it's been a little while since you folks have had a citizens petition before you. So I will kind of briefly, I think I sent you some information on that, but I will briefly just run through it really quickly in case you have any questions. Under state law, Indiana Code 13-14-8-5, any person can present a written proposal to adopt, amend, or repeal a rule as long as the petition meets the requirements of the statute. It must be supported by a statement of reasons and accompanied by a petition signed by at least 200 people who support the position taken on the proposal. We came up with our own process. That's basically what the statute says. So over the years working with this, we came up with our own process. The citizens petition on rulemaking is presented to the board at a regularly scheduled board meeting. Then the board accepts the petition and the agency staff then can read the rule folks are the ones who verify whether it meets the requirements, if there are, there are duplications of names, things like that. The statute requires the proposal be accompanied by the petition that has to have at least 200 signatures on it. It has to be supported by statement of reasons, and the proposal cannot deal with the subject matter upon which this board has held a hearing within the previous 6 months of the submission of the actual proposal. And the last requirement is that the proposal not be plainly devoid of merit. And that was a question that some of you had as to how we determine merit. And as I provided just the most basic of, there's no statutory definition for that. Therefore, when you don't have a statutory definition, you look at the use of that term, merit. And so it is up to this board to make the determination of whether a petition that is brought before you, if it meets the other requirements of the statute, whether it has merit to hold a hearing. That hearing would be to basically discuss what the issue is that has arisen and also whether the board would then direct the agency to engage in rulemaking. I think the most recent one that we had was probably the one related to the water program, which and that was a situation where, again, there's not a lot in the statute. So what we came up with was sort of that work group type process to work on the issue itself. So it's not just a rulemaking or nothing, it's the people need the ability to be able to speak to the board. So that's just a quick overview of that. We did make those determinations for this particular petition about the statutory requirements. And so now it's up to you as a board to decide how you would like to move forward with that. But I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on the process, such as it is.
Are there any questions for Nancy? First of all, about the process that we're going through, and second, on the proposed merit of the petition.
Yes, Chairman Guard, Ken Rulin. I had one quick question for Nancy. Is it statutorily allowable that we would direct a specific rule to just like one specific location in the state, or does it have to be a statewide rule?
The statute doesn't speak to that, but generally speaking, when we are doing regulations in rulemaking, the general requirement is that those are applicable. I mean, there are situations where we have specific rules that actually are about specific entities, and especially in air rules, we have we have stack requirements for industries, but in a situation like fugitive dust, where it really is it's something that it's not specific to any, the complaint is specific to a particular area, but the concept of it in terms of how it is regulated isn't specific to a particular industry. So there's nothing that tells you couldn't specifically do that, but that could be problematic in terms of how it is then applied elsewhere or not applied elsewhere. So generally, in a situation like this, where it is something of a general nature from a regulatory perspective, it would probably be most prudent to make it something that is relatively broadly effective.
Right, that was my concern, because if we're not going to allow gravel pits anywhere in the state of Indiana, we're not going to have any more houses built in the state. So it's just one of those, I wanted to make sure what we were talking about. Thank you for that.
Welcome.
And Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong on this, and this is kind of a DNR issue, but I think with the extraction of minerals, I think that is something, if somebody's in that business and finds a location that they can extract minerals, they can do it.
I might have to speak with my friends at DNR on that one, because we don't really deal in the mineral extraction business. So, I mean, other than to, probably regulate people after the fact. So,
Madam Chair, there's a couple avenues. Coal, oil, and gas have their own sets of statute and administrative rule. Aggregate, really the only thing the department looks at is implications to floodway flow. So they're not stockpiling materials that then adversely flood their neighbors. So they're permitted with specific layouts to their facilities to ensure when we have flood waters, they flow as efficiently as possible.
Uh-huh. Okay, thank you. Well, you know, with this specific location, I happen to drive through there fairly frequently. And the gravel pits, and it's a nuisance, I agree. I had my car washed the other day and then drove through there and, my tires were all dirty, but those gravel pits were there long before all of that development started there. The development started long after the gravel pits were originally there. I guess I'm a little bit concerned that if we start having a hearing on this, that we're going to get into this business of having hearings on a lot of different things just for very specific locations. And I think that could be a problem. But, I'm happy for anybody to disagree with me if they want to. I also hope all of you saw the attachment that was sent by, I think Martin Marietta, that told how often they sweep the highway and water it down and those sorts of things.
I would agree with you and add, I guess, a little slightly different, Madam Chair, that I don't want folks to feel like they don't have a place to bring a concern, but I think the failure in local zoning, to me, it doesn't matter who's there first, the local zoning that sometimes allow dissimilar developments to exist, it contribute to this type of breakdown, regardless of what rule could be passed or contemplated. We're left sometimes with indifferent neighbors. And so maybe to express some of these concerns back within your local community that governs some of how the development occurs within the county or within the city.
That's right. Well, the people that have developed around there knew those gravel pits were there. Any other thoughts from members of the commission on how to deal with this?
This is Joanne Alexandrovich. I do have some thoughts. I don't disagree with either you or Cal. But I spent considerable time studying this issue presented by the petitioners. And based on my studies, I determined that the petitioners did not present enough evidence to prove that there is indeed a problem that we can address as a board. But then I realized it's the board's duty to hear testimony and view evidence that may lead us to decide whether a new rulemaking is necessary. Therefore, I concluded that the petition is not plainly devoid of merit, and that it's the responsibility of this board to hold a hearing on the issue. So unless there's any more discussion, I'd like to move that we take a vote on whether or not the petition is completely devoid of merit, plainly devoid of merit, and hopefully if the board agrees with my position, schedule a hearing at our next meeting.
Is there a second? Did I hear a second? Not hearing the second, the motion has failed. So do I hear a motion to, and I think just to clarify the record, we probably need to have a motion to not have a hearing, that we think it's devoid of merit. Is there a motion
Sure.
there?
Chairman Guard, Ken Rulin, I guess I would make the motion that at this time, the petition is devoid of merit, and obviously would let them know that if they go back and can satisfy what Joanne wants in terms of proof that it isn't without merit, that there is some merit to it. But at this time, based upon what she just said, we don't have any evidence that it has merit. And so therefore I would move that until further evidence is brought forward that this petition is devoid of merit.
Is there a second to that motion?
Was that a motion? Can I comment on that?
Let's get the second first. Do we have a second?
I would make a second on that motion. Chris Horn.
Okay. Now we're open for discussion. Dr. Alexandrovich?
Just to clarify, I felt like the petitioners did not provide enough evidence to prove that there's something we can do. But that doesn't mean we can do something, or maybe we can't do something, I don't know which way. And I think that in trying to answer that question means that it's not devoid of merit because we don't know what the answer is. Either there's nothing we can do or there's something we can do. We don't know yet until we have a hearing, so we can get more evidence. Is there something we can do? That's what I meant. I think that makes more sense.
Is there any other discussion? Anybody else? Well, I think probably we need a roll call vote on this. So Dr. Nemec?
Again, what's before us, do you want to rephrase it? I believe I understand what it is and what my vote is going to be. But I believe what was put forward was that a motion to not have any further meetings about this at this time.
Yeah, I think Mr. Rulon just said that it was determined the petition is devoid of merit at this time. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was making the motion that it's devoid of merit at this time. So the vote would be that it's devoid of merit, but I'm just saying that the people that petitioned, if they want to bring evidence, we can always hear it again later. But right now, it's not there. So that was the motion, that it is currently devoid of merit.
Okay.
Yes,
And
that's
that
what I thought.
motion is on the floor. Okay, Dr. Nemec,
Yes.
Dr. Alexandrovich,
No.
Mr. Schuler,
Yes.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Rulon,
Yes.
Ms. Nelson,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Etzler,
Yes.
Ms. Kozierski,
Yes.
and the chair votes aye, so it's 10 yeas, 1 nay. So at this time, we will not schedule a hearing on the petition. On other matters, this is an open forum. Is there anyone that wishes to address the board today?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Just to, identify yourself, please.
Sure. My name is Joyce Dreesen. I live in the Crystal Lake area. And I was at the last meeting when we presented the petition on fugitive dust. I did have a number of pieces of evidence to present at that time, but it was determined in March that we would meet again today. So we had a bit of evidence to present in March, but we did not present it. So I'm a bit concerned that the group has decided that there is no merit when we have not presented evidence.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Is there anyone else that wants to address the board today? Not necessarily on this, but on anything.
On this, my name is Farrell Kempton. I sit on the homeowners association board for Crystal Lake. And I just got involved in this, and what Joyce just mentioned
we have evidence, but when I listened on the call last time with the board basically said that is not the time to present the evidence. That you would then take it back and discuss it and come back to us and let us know whether it was devoid of merit. And now you're making a decision and we haven't had an opportunity to present it. Also, there's a current rule regulation that's out there right now that they're not abiding by. An attachment that you reviewed from Martin Marietta that we have not even seen. So we don't know whether that was valid, invalid, accurate, not accurate. So I think that I would ask you to reconsider taking a look at this. I live there and there's health concerns with how much dust in the last 3 or 4 years that these companies are generating. We're not asking them to go away. We know they were there before our residential district. However, we're just asking to be good neighbors. What do we need to help them with, or them help us with, to help eliminate some of the dust? That's all we're asking. We're not asking for them to move. We're just asking for some help. And if you guys aren't going to do it, where do we go?
Well, let me make one comment. You made reference to the current rule and that, in your opinion, the current rule is not being enforced in this situation. And if you feel that way, there's a way that you can go to the agency and ask them to look and see if in fact the rules being abided by, or if it's being violated. So I would suggest that route be looked at this point.
We have sent in concerns, and there were actually violations given out. The last inspection, I believe, was in November of 2022, and there were violations sent to some of the companies along 96th Street. We have been trying to work with the compliance division to find out what specifically was sent to them and what the ramifications were. We were given access to the VFC, which is the IDEM virtual filing cabinet. But after trying for a couple of hours to get to the specific violation and results, we were not able to. So we've been emailing back and forth with the Office of Air Quality Compliance and Enforcement to try to get the information on the violation letters and what action has been taken, but thus far have not had any luck.
Well, I think.
Brian Marcus's commissioner.
Yes, Commissioner.
Yeah, so we'll make sure to get you the inspection reports and violation letters. We'll make sure that you have, who are you working with in the agency? Is there a particular-
We've been emailing with Kurt Graham.
Okay, we will make sure my assistant commissioner, deputy, and air quality are here right now. So we will make sure Graham sends you those documents. I don't know if the enforcement process is over or not, but we'll, if it is, we'll send you the agreed order, whatever penalties that went along with that. And then you can let us know what you think once you review it.
So is it correct? And again, we have two issues. First issue is enforcement of current regulations, because dust is not supposed to leave the properties. And I know the companies are doing a lot to mitigate the dust, but there still is quite a bit leaving. And that's one of the reasons that we developed the petition. And it did take quite we have over the 200 plus signatures because there are definite concerns for health issues within the neighborhood. We are very clear that the entities were here prior to development, but we are concerned. Is it correct that based on the meeting today, we will not be able to approach you again for 6 months?
Nancy?
No, that is in fact not the case. The 6 month applies to an actual hearing. So,
Okay.
the citizens petition can be reinvigorated. And certainly it sounds like with the fact that there's additional information, that certainly might be something that would be beneficial for the board to see. So, that 6 month thing is only about the formal hearing in the statute.
So,
Thank you. Is there a way that we can send you the evidence prior to the meeting in August, or will we need to wait until that time?
You can submit that information, and we can provide it to the board. That's generally how we do it. So we're certainly happy to provide that information. We provided the board, I believe earlier, when this was originally brought up, with some of the compliance information that the commissioner spoke about as well. So yeah, I mean, it's incumbent upon us to provide as much information so that people can make informed decisions on these things.
well, at this point, just having this discussion now, I think will serve to at least help address some of the enforcement issues that you have talked about, and the fact that now you're probably going to get more information. So your petition at this point has not been totally worthless. And it's started an administrative process that I think probably needs to be done. And after you get all that information, if you're not satisfied, and if you have additional information that you think would prove that the issue is not devoid of merit, the petition can always be amended and refiled and just start a new petition.
Well, Madam Chair, I think it's also important for the board to understand whether it's an issue of rules actually needing to be changed or the enforcement of current rules, if that is the actual solution.
Exactly.
What I was thinking, if they're not following current rules, why would changing the rules fix the issue?
It would change.
The issue,
It could be a bit of both,
It
but I
could
think it's
change
important to
their-
understand.
Their permit requirements.
It is.
our understanding of the current rules is that they only apply to dust leaving the properties. They do not apply to deposition of the fugitive dust. So that's where we wanted to update the rules, so that there could be some enforcement when dust is doing damage in surrounding neighborhoods.
Is anyone else want to address any issue? And I want to make clear, just this discussion isn't a public, an official public hearing on the issue. This is an open forum that we provide for anybody, whether it's virtual or in the audience, to comment on any IDM issue.
Hi, my name is Joyce Lavotis, and I am also part of the committee for the petition. And I think you hit the nail on the head, is that really the reason why we knew that the measures, the control measures were not being followed of the current rules. And there's a strong list of those current measures that need to be controlled in Article 3261A665. And it's very lengthy, and I don't know if it has been viewed that this has been done frequently. Is it inspected frequently to see that these control measures are done? And the second thing is, this business has grown so much, tenfold in the past. Well, the last time these rules were done was 2001. And it's changed a lot since then. So that's my input on that.
Well, at this point, I think we're talking about an enforcement issue, which the commissioner has addressed, that he's directed his staff to provide you the information that you have requested. And I think if the commissioner sees that there are obvious violations, the agency can address those. Those are administrative issues, and this board, other than just calling the attention to it, to the administration, we have no enforcement power as a board here on this, on enforcing rules. Is there any comment on any other issue? Okay. Does the board, anybody on the board have any comments on any other issue? Or
Chairman
this?
Gard, Ken Rulin again. I just wanted to really congratulate the IDEM staff and our new director on, they really did an exemplary job managing the process at the State House this year. And I think somebody should say thank you once in a while. So I think they deserve that. And I trust if there's an enforcement issue that they will jump on that. They're pretty good at that. So I just wanted to thank them for an excellent job working with the legislature this year. It was very well done.
Thanks, Ken.
I think you're exactly right, Ken. I'm very proud of this staff, and I'm particularly proud of the commissioner. You all may not know, but he was my legislative assistant for a number of years when I was in the Senate. And so I feel like I've kind of grown up with him. So, but I'm particularly pleased with his direction of the agency. Are there any other closing comments from any board members? Well, if not, the next meeting is tentatively set for August the 9th, 2023 at 1:30 in conference room A. And we may or may not provide Zoom. That will be determined, and let you all know about that. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second, Katie Nelson.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Well, you all enjoy the next 2 months of the summer. This is kind of a strange one, but at least we had some rain, and
Yeah.
I think the corn looks better, doesn't it?
It looks better, but it's still pretty dry. Always need something, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman Gard.
Okay.
We all have stickers back.
Yeah, I always know when I walk in the room what Christy said.
Yeah, yep.
I'm kind of all, I'm gonna have to start over again.
Yeah.